I mentioned much earlier on your attitude to borrowing. With mortgage rates generally around the world quite low at the moment, then if you can borrow money at say 4 or 5% and you can generate say 6% in rental income plus 15, 20%, 10% capital growth, then that looks an interesting proposition. But if you're doing that, you need to buy particularly carefully. The right property, the right price, the right area. Because if you buy the wrong property and instead of it getting you a 6% rental income, it only generates you a 3% rental income, then you will have a reminder of just how stupid you were every single month when you have to write out a check to the bank to make up the deficit on your account. If you're buying commercial property or if you're buying via a company, it can be more complicated to get mortgage finance, although not impossible. And if you are buying with a mortgage, you need to be alert to the risk of increasing mortgage rates. And in some places we can guard against that risk by taking fixed rate mortgages for the entire duration of the mortgage, maybe 15 or 20 years. I mentioned earlier on personal use of the property. I think this is a hugely undervalued perk, and if you're given a choice of a property which is going to perform well as an investment but which you don't like, and another property which is going to perform roughly the same as an investment, why not choose the place you like? There are lots and lots of properties in the world which can perform well as an investment. If you're looking for a holiday home, of course, then personal use is all important, but are you prepared to limit your personal use to make more out of it as an investment? We have some clients who we call July-August landlords, and they will buy a property intending to rent it out, and they will after a while say, you know, this is all too much trouble. Not only do I have to look after all these tenants, but when I go there myself to use the property, it feels like staying in a holiday home or a hotel, not my own property. And what they end up doing is saying, I'm going to go out and have a holiday in June, and I'm going to turn this property from personal use mode to rental mode. In other words, I'm going to put away all of our personal possessions and valuables. And then I'm going to rent it to the maximum extent I can in July and August, and maybe the beginning of September, and then go back in September for another holiday, convert it back into personal use mode, and from that point on, for the rest of the year, it's only my family and my friends who use the property. And strangely, you can make 80% of your entire rental income that you would have made renting like mad throughout the year by taking that course of action. So let's look at the legal steps. You've chosen your property, you now want to go ahead and buy it. And the first of the legal steps is that you have to choose a lawyer. Realistically, you're either going to choose a specialist law firm, such as the International Law Partnership, or you're going to go to a local lawyer in the country in question. What you can't do is go to your ordinary high street English solicitor, because they just wouldn't know where to start. It's not their job. Then, in our case, we always talk to you about the best form of ownership, and you'll remember I said earlier on that this is the most important decision that you need to make. Getting this wrong will cost you a fortune in unnecessary taxes, and I mean a fortune. We have a separate seminar in this series called Who Should Own My Property, and it's well worth a look at that. What price do you put in the title deed? In this country, if you're buying a house and it's £200,000, you put £200,000 in the title. That's thought a very quaint habit by some of my colleagues abroad because, of course, that's the value the taxman uses to assess the value for tax purposes. And so if you tell him it was only £100,000, you only pay half as much tax. And that form of underdeclaration is rampant throughout the world, but gradually disappearing. And in many of the countries where it was common practice a year or two ago, it has now almost disappeared, and it's disappearing everywhere else. It's illegal, and we suggest you don't do it. Much better to declare the proper value. Now, sometimes that gives you a problem, because sometimes the seller will not sell to you if you insist on declaring the full value, because he probably only declared 10-15% when he bought it 5 years ago. And if you now declare the full value, he's going to have the mother of all capital gains tax problems. So sometimes you may have to fudge. Unfortunately, there is a certain amount of room for manoeuvre. I always say it's a bit like doing 40 miles an hour in a 30 limit. We know it's wrong. Most of us do it from time to time, and if you get caught, it's not the end of the world. Do 100 miles an hour in a 30 limit, you'll go to jail. Well, so it is with under declarations. Try to declare the full amount. If you can't, discuss with your lawyer what the options are so that you can at least proceed in the safest possible way. Then there are various inquiries that are made by your lawyers, and they of course vary substantially from country to country, and we have a whole series of seminars in this series about what to look out for in each individual country. Sort out your finance, and eventually your lawyer should produce a report for you setting out what they found out and whether it's worth buying this property. Then you will sign a contract, what we call a preliminary contract, to buy the property and to pay across a deposit. Usually, if the property is a new property, there will then be stage payments to pay the rest of the price as the building work continues. In some countries, at this point, there arises the difficult question of bank guarantees, because the law requires a developer who wants to take money from you before he gives you the keys to give you a guarantee so that if he can't complete the project, you get your money back. And some developers, despite the fact the law is crystal clear, refuse to do that. Well, if he goes bust, you'll lose your money, and we'll talk to you about what the risks are and how to manage that risk or take some other form of security. We will then normally need to prepare a power of attorney authorising someone in the country to sign the final paperwork on your behalf, because many people don't want to go, possibly at short notice, to do so in person. Final checks are carried out, and the title is signed, and the taxes are paid. Each country has its own problems. Some have restrictions on the right of foreigners to own property. Some may only permit them to own 1 or 2 properties. Some may need a special permit, and so on. There will be specific legal problems. There'll be specific tax problems, specific inheritance problems. The main dangers, though, are the same in every single country in the world, including here in Britain and in Ireland. Bad legal title. Does the seller have the right to sell the property? Does the paperwork support that right, prove that he's got that right? Does the property have building consent or planning permission? They are the big dangers that occur everywhere. Unfair contracts and inadequate specifications are dangers that occur specifically in many of the emerging market countries. But again, the dangers vary from country to country. For more information about the various opportunities and the various details for each of the countries you might be interested in, have a look at our website. Earlier on, we talked about managing the property and how important it was to get that sorted out at an early stage. And I said that really there were a number of choices available to you. Doing it yourself, using a local person, or using a professional management company. If you are going to think about management, you really need to think carefully about how much of this you are prepared to do yourself. Are you prepared, for example, to look after the lettings, leaving the local person only to be responsible for cleaning and doing the handovers? Or do you want to get rid of the whole job to a professional company? If you are going to use a professional company, then fees can be 15, 20, even 35% of the rent that you receive, because especially letting on short-term holiday lets is very labour intensive. So if you can do some of this work yourself and reduce those charges, that money you've saved goes directly into your profit. Whichever decision you make as to how to manage the property, then you can't underestimate the importance of self-help. Even if you've got the best management company in the world, they may, for example, on the Costa del Sol, only let the property for you for 25, maybe 30 weeks a year. The rest of the time it will be empty. If you, from your own resources, from your friends, your family, your neighbours, your workmates, the people at church, the people at school, find another 6, 7, 8 tenants, that's going to completely change the economics of the investment that you have made, because those extra 8 weeks rental income basically goes straight to profit. A little bit more water, a little bit more electricity, but basically it's profit. If you are going to get involved in self-help, then think about a website, think about doing some advertising. And I'm not talking about expensive advertising. Little piece in your school magazine, the church magazine, notice board on the supermarket notice board, all work very well and can bring you in a surprising amount of revenue. If you're going to be doing some self-help, try and do a deal with your managing agent so that the tenants you have introduced, and where they're only managing the property, you don't pay their full fee. Full fee is where they find the tenant and manage the property. And as I mentioned earlier on, consult them early. Sort out how this is going to work, make sure that the property is suitably equipped, maximise your potential for rental income. And again, we have another seminar in this series about how to maximise rental potential on your property. When it comes to choosing a management company, you have to understand that there are some great property management companies out there, and there are some out-and-out crooks. It is so easy. If they are sitting in their office on a Friday afternoon in August and someone comes in and says, have you got a property to rent for next week, and yours is available and it's £1,000, it's so easy for them to put that £1,000 in their trouser pocket, not in your bank account. How will you ever discover? You're thousands of miles away. How will you ever discover that they have rented the property for that week? Well, you need to choose a good company. Get recommendations from local people, recommendations from your lawyer. Take up references. Make sure they're happy with the service they've been getting. If they're not, go elsewhere. Insist on inspecting 1 or 2 of the properties they're currently managing. If when you get there, that property is dirty and the swimming pool's got scum on it, that's what yours will look like, and it will not rent, or if it does rent, you'll have to pay refunds. Have a look at their website. Would you want to do business with these people? The web is now one of the biggest ways of renting out property. And have a look at the information pack they send through the post. If it landed on your doorstep, would you be impressed? Would you want to do business? Have a proper written contract telling what your rights and obligations are. And most important of all, monitor them. Tell them, even if it's a downright lie, shock horror, that you have friends in the area who also have investment properties, and that each time any of you is in the area, you check on each other's properties to see whether they're in good condition and whether they're occupied. Put a telephone in the property and religiously, twice a week, telephone the property. And if someone picks up the phone, you want to see some income in the accounts for that week, or you want a very good explanation why not. And of course that means that the contract must say that they must break down the income week by week. You can't be doing with miscellaneous income January to July, because you can't monitor that. Make sure the contract gives you the right to get rid of them if they're not performing. Okay, now there's some bad news. If you are going to make money out of a property abroad, you are going to have to pay some tax. There's no way out of that. It's just the way it is. If you are going to own property abroad but continue to live in this country, you will be classified as a non-resident in the country where you own the property. That is to say, non-resident for tax purposes. And in this seminar, I'm just going to look briefly at the rules relating to non-residents. Now, of course, the rules vary dramatically from one country to another, and details of the taxes in each of the countries we deal with is available in other seminars in this series. But the basic rules remain pretty similar in most of the countries in the world. As a non-resident, that is to say someone who doesn't live in the country, you will typically have to pay some local property taxes, the equivalent of the rates or council tax, and they're generally paid on exactly the same basis as you would pay if you were a local person. They're normally very low, a few pounds a year, a few £100 a year, nothing like what you pay in Britain. When you make money from renting out your property, you will have to pay income tax on the money you make in the country in question. There may be some deductions you can count against that tax. Particularly important is the question of whether you can deduct mortgage interest from the amount you generate, so reducing your tax bill. That income is declared in the country where the property is located. You pay the taxes you owe in that country. Then you have to declare that money again in your British or Irish tax return. And if you're resident in the UK for tax purposes, you will get a discount from the tax you would otherwise have to pay in this country on the basis of that income, and you'll get a pound for pound discount for the money you've already paid abroad, and that's called double taxation relief. When you sell the property and make a profit, as we hope you do, you'll have to pay some capital gains tax. And again, you'll pay it first and foremost in the country where the property is located. You'll declare the gain again in Britain or in Ireland, and you will then have in the UK a deduction pound for pound against your British tax liability of the tax you've already paid overseas. Some countries have an annual tax called a wealth tax. It's a horrible tax. They work out your entire wealth and tax you as a percentage of that. Fortunately, if you're not a resident in the country, the only wealth they take into account is the wealth you have in that country, which is basically the value of your house, and generally the percentage rate is very, very low, so it's not normally something to get very excited about. And then, if you give the property away or when you die, there will be some inheritance tax to pay, but generally by that stage you're past caring. The tax is paid in the country where the property is located, paid by your heirs, and you will have to declare that inheritance again in the UK, but again there's an arrangement where you can set off the tax you've paid overseas against the tax you have to pay here. You must understand really clearly the tax consequences, both in the UK or in Ireland and overseas, of buying the property that you're thinking of buying. Because sometimes two identical properties in different countries can generate a totally different profit for you in terms of rental income and capital gains, simply because of the tax rules. And sometimes a property that makes you less money can make you more money, because a property that makes you less money in a country which doesn't charge tax can be more valuable to you than a property that makes you more money in a country that has a very high level of taxation. And that takes me on to the question of ownership. And I've mentioned this now 3 or 4 times, and I don't apologise for that, because as I've kept on saying, it is the most important decision that you have to make. Who should become the legal owner of my property? Why is it important? Well, it's for a number of reasons. First of all, it's to do with tax. If you put the property in the wrong names, then you will pay massively too much tax during your lifetime and on your death. Secondly, in some countries there are limitations on what you can do with your property when you die. There are fixed rules that say that fixed relatives have the right to inherit a fixed percentage of your property. And in those countries, if you put the property in the wrong name, then it will be the wrong relatives have the right to inherit. And it's always expensive to change it if you get it wrong at the beginning. It's not like here, where if you buy your property with your wife and for some reason you just put it in your name, and a couple of years later you think, that was stupid, I should have put it in both names. It's a very low cost operation. Generally, in other countries, that would be treated as a taxable gift from you to your wife, and in the worst case scenario, it can carry tax of up to 82% of the value transferred, plus the legal expenses. So in other words, it doesn't bear thinking about to say, I'll put this in my name for now and we'll sort all that nonsense out later on. You need to decide who is going to be the owner at the very latest by the time you sign the title to the property, and ideally before you sign anything at all. And why do I say that? Well, because in the last 2-3 years, maybe 4 years, we've seen a new trend. And that is clients who come to see us when they've already signed a contract to buy the property in, let's say, the name of the husband and wife. And we'll sit down with them and it'll become obvious that that was not the best way of buying, that we could have put the property in a different name much more beneficially. So we phone the agent and we say, just see Mr. and Mrs. Smith, doesn't seem to be a problem, they're delighted to be buying your property, just one small thing, they're going to put this in the kid's name, not in their name. And the developer will then say, that's fine by me, but do remember I have a contract with these people, and if they want to change it, the price is going up. And what, of course, he's really doing is he's saying, I know why you're doing this. You're doing this because this is going to save your clients a whole truckload of money. And if there's a truckload of money to be had, I want my share of it. Doesn't happen very often, but it is getting increasingly common, unfortunately. So choose to have the right owner at the earliest possible stage, ideally before you sign anything. And the choice is not always obvious. Just because you are buying a property with your husband or wife does not mean to say that buying in both of your names is going to be the right way forward. And do not underestimate the savings. When we talk about saving lots of money, many of our clients think we're talking about saving £100, £500, £5,000. We're talking about lots of money. I recently dealt with a purchase by a client of a £300,000 apartment in Paris. And by changing the ownership structure, we saved £180,000 of tax. £180,000.